Can everybody see the slides here? Actually, I can't check the chat. I'll assume I can. We can, and I think we'll start. So hi everyone, welcome to Introduction to Blender by so an intro to 3D modeling for specifically game development, and it's presented by me. So I'm a U4 computer science student at McGill. I also am an indie game developer. I freelanced as well for a few small companies. I've also worked independently as a technical artist as well for a few months. And I am also your VP Game Jam at GameDev McGill. So these are the kinds of models that we'll be talking about. So these are the ones that I've made before. So hopefully I'll be able to share this similar knowledge towards you guys. So why should you choose to use Blender when there are so many industry standard 3D software out there? So before we address more about that, let's talk about what Blender is. So within the history of Blender. So Blender was created by Tom Rosendahl in Amsterdam, Netherlands back in 2002. It was created specifically for a smaller animation company that was there. And it first started as a C and C++ software, and then they started embedding Python, and that's why you see Blender using Python scripting but we'll see about that later on. So this is a very famous one that was a movie that was made just using Blender, Cosmos Laundromat. I don't know if you've seen it before, but it's a really good movie. So I suggest looking. It's really short too as well. So now let's address why should we use Blender? So pros and cons. So an important pro is that it's open source, so it's free for all of you. There are more resources available online due to the fact that it's a more open and available software. So you see a lot of more people using it. So you'll see probably more stuff on Google and on YouTube about like tutorials on how to use the software. Blender itself is a very capable tool. It has a lot of stuff that you can use. And recently it's been getting quite big investments from Epic Games as well as Unity. It has quite a good performance for lower end machines just because of the fact that it's a smaller software itself. So you'll see that when you start using software such as GDS Max or Maya, it will go from 20 gigabytes to maybe like less than a gigabyte, so maybe around 500 megabytes for software. There's a specific really important feature that's in Blender, but you'll probably not use it, which is called Grease Pencil. Grease Pencil allows you to create semi 2D and 3D. I've attached a link here. This is an amazing tutorial by someone who's really good at using Grease Pencil. I suggest looking at it at some point. And also there's Python integration, which really helps sometimes when you need to use code to generate meshes or you need to debug something. And however, there are cons. It's not industry standard. So especially if you're looking to build your career as a 3D artist or a technical artist, you have to learn another software. And these industry standard would be mostly Maya or 3ds. It's also a jack of all trades, master of none. That means it doesn't specialize in one specific area. So for example, Maya has a very specialized animation software feature for modeling in a way that kind of resembles clay. We'll have stuff like ZBrush, which is much better than Blender to use. So let's move on. So let's start off with Blender. So there are a few useful shortcuts in Blender, which I've set here. Most importantly, what we'll be using is Control Shift Space G E S and R, so towards the left side here. I think what we'll do here is go ahead and I'll just show you what all of these are. So let's look at this cube here that I've made. As you can see, right now I'm pressing on the mouse wheel. So here you can see the mouse wheel here. If I press on it and I drag, you'll see that I can move the world's camera itself like this, like kind of an art ball feature. And as well, if I hold the left click and I drag it all around the surface, you'll see that I can select specific vertexes that's able to be seen into the scene. Now, there is an important thing that you must know is you don't really have to press these things all the time. What you can do is you can select by holding left click, pressing space, which will give you a few options here. So we have here select box, which is what we're using. The cursor, which allows you to basically like set an origin point, I guess, technically within the world coordinate frame. And then we have what's called move. Move, if we use it, you'll see there's these 3 axes here. So as you can know, we can go x-axis like this, y-axis like this, and z-axis here. Also, I should mention here real quick, Blender uses z-axis up. So just be aware of that. And now what you can think of is, okay, I can do all of these things, but now is it possible for me to select everything without doing, like pressing here and then pressing here again? I can do this by going on the top right here, which says toggle X-ray. So we can do either click on this or do Alt Z. So if I do Alt Z, you'll see that the mesh here becomes invisible. Well, you can see the vertexes on the other side, which allows me to basically select everything as well. Another one that you should know is if you press A. So on the keyboard, well, I guess I'm using a Mac one, but this one A here, if I click it, you'll see that I can select the whole mesh. Now, these are quite important things that you must know because it saves you time, a lot of time. It's quite useful. So now let's move on to rotate. Rotate, as you all know, it rotates on a specific axis, but there is a way to change if you like specifically. So we can go here and we can set a different kind of rotation. So right now we're in Euler. We can also go into quaternion like this. We can also go into axis angle. Now, these won't be really important for us because, well, it might be, but it's not as important. There's also scale, which allows us to basically scale down, scale up, scale on the z-axis, scale on the x-axis, scale on the y-axis. Oops, sorry about that. Scale on the y-axis like this. So now let's move on to look at transform. So transform basically moves around. So it's basically, I think you've seen this in probably linear algebra 1. Actually, no, I'm not going to go into the mathematics side. Don't worry. Now let's move on here. I think for these, we'll continue on and I'll show you later what these are. Before that, I'll quickly show here on the top left. You see here that there are either a dot, a line, or a face looking icon here. So these allows me to choose specifically what kind of surface that I want to press on this mesh. So here, when I click on vertexes, so vertexes are basically the corners here, allows me to select only the vertexes. If I choose edges, so these are the lines that cover the mesh, I can basically just select the line here like this. And if I go to G, it's possible for me to just move this line specifically. Now let's go on to face. Face basically simple, allows me to choose as face on the mesh, extend it, do what I want. Now let's go back to the slides. Present. So here we'll see on the top here there's a viewport, and within this viewport, especially for game development, these section will be important for us. So the general, which allows us to choose between what kind of shader that we want, what kind of viewport that we want to choose. The image editor, which is specifically for like grease pencil, or you want to do UV texturing. UV editor, which allows you to specifically choose what kind of faces that you want to attach, but I'll explain that later on. And importantly, the animation, which I will hopefully cover towards the end. Oops, sorry about that. So there's this thing called object mode and edit mode within Blender. So the difference is basically within object mode, we're working within the world frame, and we are not able to modify the mesh in most ways, unless we use a modifier. And within an edit mode, we can basically move around the coordinate frame of the mesh and edit it. So what I mean by I cannot edit in object mode would be, if I press tab here on this keyboard, well, basically tab here, if I press it, I go back into object mode. And within object mode, basically I can't, edit the mesh at all. However, if I go into here on the corner right, there's a little wrench here on the corner, and these are called modifiers. So modifiers are basically little tools that you can use to basically perform like a transformation or a specific scaling, or you can do subdivisions, or you can triangulate the mesh, or you can even mirror. So for within GameDev, within the context of GameDev, what will be important for us will be subdivision surface, triangulate, and as well mirror. So what mirror allows us to do is basically mirror on a specific axis. So if I have this mesh here, I click on Y too. So this would mean I would be mirroring on the x-axis, which is this way, y-axis on this way. So now if I click on this, you can see that I can mirror two things at once. Now this becomes super important when we're going to model characters, because we want to have our characters symmetric. Unless, I don't know, you want to do like something different. Usually you want to keep it symmetric, you want to save time, so you want to use mirror. It's quite important. Another modifier that we have is called subdivision surface. Subdivision surface, you'll cover this mostly if you take Comp 557 later on. I won't go into it because this is this is focused for artists. Subdivision basically smooths out your meshes. So here we see that this box can be turned into this kind of mesh. And I can edit this like this. Let's say I click on this vertex. If I drag it, it also modifies the mesh at the same time. Sorry about that. Now let's go on to our slides. So there's a thing called linking and appending. This is not really important for us because we'll be basically mostly moving meshes within our game engine, but this is important for artists who want to render stuff solely on Blender, or want to maybe use the game engine that Blender offers. Trust me, you don't want to use it. So appending basically allows us to bring another file from our current file. So it's like linking in C, I guess, where you have a header file that links two things. So the header file will be basically the object file within Blender that you open and you want to link something. So let's say I have this original character here. I can append from the settings, and I can bring another one. So I can bring like a clone of this basically, or another object if I want. Now, when I bring it in, it will be independent from the parent, which means I can modify the imported mesh from our current file. And another thing that exists is the linking approach, which means our mesh will be dependent on a parent, which means we can't affect it. Now, you might be thinking, okay, what's the use of using linking? Well, later on, you'll see if you go into the industry, you'll have files where maybe like 2 million, there's like 2 million vertexes for like a character, and you want to put it into a scene, right? Well, when you put it in the scene, you might not want to affect it in any way because you don't want to work with 2 million meshes and 2 million vertexes, sorry, and end up like messing up something because it'll just waste time. So that's why you use linking. So this is another explanation here. So if I have this file that I open called Ghibli, and I have a file called low-res night, which is 200 megabytes, another one called 500 megabytes, I can load it here from Ghibli, but without increasing the file size of Ghibli because I'm linking this one and this one. Now let's go on to modeling. So modeling is another feature from Blender that exists. I'll show it here. So within the top here, you'll see a few options here in the menu. So first we have the layout of what we were just looking at. So basically basic vertex modifiers, face modifiers. We have this thing called modeling. Now let me open another one. Let's go to, I mean, it doesn't really matter, but okay, I'll use this one maybe. Okay. So if I go into modeling here, oh boy, what I can do is select everything. I can, oh, sorry, not modeling, sculpting. modeling is what we've just seen. Layout and modeling is similar. Sculpting allows us to basically sculpt the mesh. So there are a few modifiers here. So draw sharp, clay, which allows us to clayify. Now I think it's because my strength isn't big enough. I'll put it at 2. Put the radius high. Now these basically modifiers allows me to modify this mesh in a way that I'm like, you know, manipulating clay. So this is not really useful because we'll be learning about low poly approach in this talk, but it's good to know that we have these kinds of features in Blender. It's really useful. You'll see later on when you work with really complex models, you'll have to use clay because, you know, you don't want to work with like, I don't know, 20,000 edges and like 40,000 vertexes with like these things, right? Because already, look at this already. So this is a sphere and there is a ton of faces, a ton of vertexes, a ton of edges, and we don't want to, you know, modify one by one. We'd rather use sculpting and just generalize and imagine if we were working with clay, basically. Oops. Now let's move on to sculpt mode was just done. Let's go into modeling right now. I think we have enough time, although I did rush a bit, but it'll still be fine. So low poly techniques is, I think, the most simplest way that you can create games while having this aesthetic feeling. So examples of low poly modeling techniques, is games such as Project Winter, Donut County, Virginia, Lara Croft Go are examples of using low poly techniques. Now let's look at this basic mesh box. So the way that we can create this, let's go to new, don't save. So we have this cube here, right? Now let's go into edit mode. And then we can see the whole cube. Now, what I'm going to do is, what we need to do here is we need to basically take this part here and we want to, you know, extrude it from the normal towards the inside. Now, this is where these features will come in handy. So extrude region, I'll show you here. So if I take this face here and I extrude it, it'll extrude another face and create basically more space. So what's the difference between doing this and just scale and translating it? So if I just translate it, you'll see that it extends in a way that we keep the same original mesh without creating, you know, more edges around the corner. Now this becomes useful when, let's say we start scaling and we want to add, you know, like a pillar here, like an extra face, but it's not the same as this kind of edge where it's slanted. We want to keep it straight. So this is where extruding will come important. Another one is called insert face. So inserting faces allows us to basically attach a new face. It's quite simple. Bevel. Bevel allows us to cut into selected item at an angle and create, I'm not sure, okay, nice. So basically it allows us to cut in an angle, focus on it, and move it around like this. So I think the image will show clearly what it is. Loop cut is another important feature. We can either click on loop cut here or do Control R. Control R allows us to set a new set of edges around our cube like this. Now this becomes useful later on when we start modeling humans, because we want to use a limited amount of edges and a limited amount of vertexes while trying to keep a form which is similar to, you know, a person's face or a person's body. Well, we can't do that with just cubes. We need to modify this cube, and it's important. So another thing, knife tool. Knife tool basically allows us to create a new edge wherever we want, however we want. However, it's important to know, once I connect to two edges, I need to press on enter to create the edge. Now you'll realize compared to the loop cut, we will be only affecting one specific face that we've chosen. So this is once more by pressing K. we can do it. Now, however, if I, let's say, press here, and then here, here, and then here, enter, it'll basically create a knife, well, a new set of edges. These ones are not quite as useful, so I won't be going into it. You probably won't be needing it for most of your game dev projects. So let's go back to the basic mesh. So first, what we need to do is, as you might have thought, is create faces, right? So the way that we can do this is press on all the faces. Now what we want here to achieve is create basically a face that's going within this face here, right? So like kind of like this little square. So how we want to do this is by pressing I. Oops, sorry. Alt I. And then we can create new faces all around. Now, I'm just doing this really quite fast, but don't worry. Now this is the important part. When I click, I want to hold on Shift on my keyboard. Press on all of the surfaces. So now we have selected the faces, and these are the ones that we want to put it back in towards a mesh from towards the origin. And we're going to do this by pressing on Alt E, which allows us to extrude in a specific way. So we have this thing called faces along normals. So what normals do is basically it figures out a normal within the mesh and allows us to drag it in like this. And this is how usually you'll make these kinds of boxes. Now let's go into a specific thing that's I think would be useful to talk about, which is, okay, we have a limited amount of edges, and let's say I want to make, you know, a cylinder. Why not? I'll add one here. Now it's important if you go into object mode if you want to create a new mesh here, or else it'll create a mesh within here. So from object mode, I'm going to create a cylinder, and we have the cylinder here. Now, what you've realized is that there's what, 32 vertexes? When we go here within this option in the bottom, we have the ability to reduce the amount of vertices. Now, usually this is take this as a word. Usually, 8 is enough to simulate a face. I mean, not a face, but a circle. Now we have 8, as you can see. And what we can do is we're going to try to make something like this. So what we can do here is Control R to create, go back into object mode, Control R, create a cut. So an edge along this line here. And then what I can do here, I can select these vertexes, scale it down by pressing S, as you can see here. Scale it down again here, pressing S.
Oh, there's a quick question
No,
in chat. So how do you get that cylinder?
Oh, cylinder, okay. Sorry, I didn't check the chat. Now, if you go into object mode, we'll have this option within layout or modeling. We have this option called add. Add allows us to add a mesh within our world, scene view. So we have cylinder, cone, torus, icosphere, UV sphere, circle, cube, plane. Now what I've just done is I've added the cylinder. Control G. I've added the cylinder here. And what I'm going to do, actually no, sorry about that. After I add the cylinder, oh, did I go on object mode again? Okay, now if I go into cylinder mode, within object mode, I'll be able to create a new instance. Now, usually when you first create a cylinder, it'll create it with 32 vertices. And what you want to do is go towards the bottom here, bottom left. It'll say add cylinder like this, right? So before you click anything, you press on add cylinder, modify the amount of vertices that you want. Usually when you work with low poly again, 8 is perfect. 8 is enough. Is that okay, or do you have more questions on it? Okay, got it. Okay, so now let's go back to this cylinder here. Where did you go? Okay. So now what I can do is scale it down. Okay, I think there's 2 attached here. Okay, good. So I'll scale it down here quickly. Now, what are we missing for the barrel? We are missing the top here, right? Because we want to have it empty, and also the little metal thing that you'll see probably in Pirates movie. So the way that we can do this is we can loop cut again, Control R, add it towards here. So as you can see. Now, this is a mistake I've made. I realize that it's quite slanted. I want to have it, more solid, like this, pop out. So I'm going to do this by pressing S again, scaling it a bit more up, like this. I'm going to go back into face mode, select these faces. So, another quick fact. If I press here, and I don't want to click all of them together, right? I can just hold on to Control. So Control. It'll probably be looking different. This is a magic keyboard. It's not a really good keyboard. If I press Control, I can select all these faces at the same time. Then I'll press Control again. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to do Alt-E, extrude faces along normals, which allows me to basically extrude a little bit, like this. Voila. Now what we're going to do here, we're going to add a face. Because if you look at here, we have these extra we have, a barrel can't be like super slim, and then, well, it could be, but we want to make it kind of cartoonish. So we're going to leave a little bit of space here on top. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to extrude down. So what I'm going to do is press E, extrude. Sorry about that. Extrude. And now we have a hole inside our barrel. Ta-da, we have our barrel. Is there any more? Okay, so I think we'll continue. Now, if you always have questions, feel free to ask. So we're going to talk about normals and backface culling. This is a really important thing when we're talking about meshes, because Unity sometimes will be very stingy about the way that you've optimized your mesh or how you placed specific faces in some ways. What will happen is basically, I think I have it here, this kind of mesh here. Well, when we import this character and it has, these extra meshes on the legs, it'll be gone from Unity. The way that we're going to fix this, the way that we're going to prevent this is by going here. So when we look at the top here, you have this little globe for these 4 little globes. And we're going to press on this one here, viewport shading, which allows us to choose a kind of lighting, color, background, and options. So within options, we're going to press backface culling and shadow. So shadow is basically, it basically allows us to see how the mesh will look like under a light. So I think the light is here. So we have the camera here, we have the light, and this point light is emitting light to this surface, right? Now it's important because at some point you'll realize, oh, maybe this color doesn't match within the shadow. So that's why we use a shadow, and we also have backface culling. This is really important. Always have backface culling enabled when you're working on a mesh. Okay. Now backface culling, you might think, what is it? Backface culling is basically when, okay, so if I delete this face, you'll see that inside we have the interior of this mesh, right? So when we look at the outside, visible. When we look at the inside, invisible. So now what backface culling means is basically this face is outside. So it's messing up, all the normals, all the calculations. So basically when you import it into a game engine, it'll be like, wait, this face doesn't exist. So why should I be rendering this on the scene? This is why you have backface culling enabled. Now, this could happen from time to time when you're working with a lot of stuff. And let's say I have X-ray involved, enabled. I didn't want to press all this, but I selected it by accident and I didn't know. And I, maybe like screwed it this way. I thought I'll be doing this, but you can see here evidences of backface culling, like these little shadows here. It might look different to you because I'm using a Maya theme for Blender. But yeah, always have backface culling installed. This is one of the most important giveaways that takeaways that you should have when after this talk. Now, there's another thing called flip normals. Flip normals is basically when the normal of a mesh ends up being flipped. You'll learn more about this when you're learning 557 more. Basically, what happens is you have this mesh, and when the algorithm is basically, when a parametric curve is going through all the mesh, and it's analyzing it, and at some point it will realize, oh wait, there's a normal that's flipped towards a negative, which means the mesh technically is on the negative space. I think this is the most easiest way that I can explain. Basically, it won't be rendering your faces like backface culling. Now, a way to fix this, usually, it's either by scripting here. So you'll see like for each vertex, go loop through it, check if the normals are fine, or else interpolate somewhere else. Or what you can do, much simpler, especially for artists, is basically go into mesh here, mesh settings, normals, recalculate the outside or recalculate the inside, or flip. So now I think I have a mesh that has that, actually. Let me see if I can find it. I think it was this one. This one had issues with backface culling within the head. Oops, sorry about that. Especially in the head. Now let's go back into, oops. On this one, I want to do backface culling, good. Now, when you look at the mesh here, I'll change it to studio. You realize that there's a few backface culling all around the mesh here, which means I won't be rendering it when I, see? It's flipped, the normals are flipped here. And the way that I can fix it is by going into mesh. Usually, it won't work all the time. This is a warning. If it doesn't work, I suggest manually going through it or writing code, but I know writing code is annoying. I can basically flip it. I think it's looking fine. Or let's say all of the normals were on the negative. Well, basically that's what we did. We can recalculate it from the outside, so the outside of the mesh, or I can recalculate the normals from inside the mesh. So when I recalculate it from the inside of the mesh, you realize, oh wait, these are the kinds of normal flipped that we can see. If I recalculate it from the outside, so from the outside of the mesh, you'll see that there's not much problem. So that's how we know that there is problem from within the inside of this specific mesh, which is the head. Now, once again, probably the best way that you can fix this is just manually going through it. I know it's a pain. You won't have a choice. Just be careful from the first time. Just make sure you have backface culling installed, enabled, and if you suspect any sort of normal flipping or negative normals, just recalculate it. Look at the kinds of problems, and then you can fix it manually by either removing these kinds of faces, reattaching faces. Don't save. Now I'll specifically mention a new kind of feature. So when you look at your keyboard, there's this X here, right? X allows us to delete things from our mesh. And this might be important because you want to correct your vertex. Let's say I don't want this vertex here, I want it somewhere else. Or I just don't want a vertex here. I can hover it, press X, I can either delete the face associated with the vertex, only the edge in the face, so keep the vertex on, or I can delete only faces. There's a lot of stuff actually. Right here, let's say I delete the vertex. So you can see here, anything that was related to this vertex here, so these faces are all gone. Now let's say I delete a face. Oh no, we have a hole, right? Well, the way that we can fix this is by going back, press on all the vertexes associated to this face that we want. Now we do this by holding Shift, and then we press F. By pressing F, it allows us to create a new face like this. So basically we can reattach, cover all the holes that we need. And this is an important feature because, everybody makes mistakes. Some things can happen. I'm going to quickly go continue because I want to cover everything. So tips and tricks, try to reduce the amount of triangles that you're going to put within your mesh. Always think minimally. Simpler the better. Now this is important. If you suck at art, I suck at it too. Try to make it simple and try to communicate to the viewers what you really want to show. Now let's go into humans. Now humans are quite one of the most hardest things that you can end up doing, especially for games. Now a good way to do this is by using reference sheets. Now a way that I can do that is I can go into object mode, add image. I can add a reference. What this allows me to do is basically I can import an image. Let's say import, hold on, do I still have it? No, okay. So let's say I had a reference image. So reference image typically looks like these. So we have all the faces. All the sides of the character. We can add a reference image and try to duplicate the mesh from there. So let's go into desktop and let's say I want to, make something like this. Now I'll just rotate it just a little bit. So from the front, I can look at it like this way. And let's say I had an image that showed the side view of the character. Now I can go into reference image again. I can add, the image with the sides, attach it in a way that it's in this way. And we can have the mesh in the middle. So now this might be annoying, but get used to it. If you don't want this to be shown, press the y-axis here. On top, it'll show you the viewport from the y-axis. I can switch it to the x-axis. I can show it from the top. Now, what I can do here, let's say I want to make something similar. So I can add a cube, try to match it to this character from the front side, try to match it from the x-axis, from the sides. I'll quickly move on from here. Now, quite an easy way to create models is by modularizing it. It's having its renaissance nowadays with indie game developers, especially horror games. It's quite a unique feature from the 90s. I think it's mostly started with I think the fourth generation of consoles. So basically PS1, Sega, Dreamcast. What else? Nintendo 64. They all use these kinds of techniques where they modularize all the different parts of the human body. So they cut everything into pieces, try to make everything efficient, and it's easier to work. I'll show you why it's easier to work this way as well. And these kinds of approaches allows us to create something like this. Low poly, we can do these kinds of cool stuff with low poly approach. Now, this is quite hard to do. It'll take you some time and practice, but at some point you'll get to it. Now let's go into UV mapping. Oh, before that, yeah, I will cover this as well during the UV mapping. Now let's go into, let's say, for example, I have this little sushi roll guy here. Now, as you can see, I've actually, think there's a better example than this. I'll show you what I've used for a previous game that I've made before. Okay, let's look at this guy, low res entity. Oh, why are you rigged? I don't want you to be rigged. Good. Now, here you can see that it has a body base and a head. Now, the reason why I did this is because when we go into UV mapping, it'll be much simpler to work with. So low poly usually basically means we're going to be we're going to be associating faces to a specific color within a color palette that we choose. So the way that we can do this is if you go into this menu here, you'll see this little cube, little sphere thing here, which will be our materials. If you used the game engine before, you know what a material is. It's a color that you attach to a mesh. Now, let's say I have a few color palettes here. Let's say I want to use this thing. Now, at first, you'll realize sometimes you might not be able to see it. To do that, we can choose for view proceeding. Actually, anything is fine, except within color, we're going to choose texture. And this allows us to attach the texture when we're modeling. Now, how can we attach faces then? Now let's go back into UV editing. And it's important that let's say you've modularized different parts, make sure both of them have a texture here. All right, I didn't explain how to do this. I'm sorry about that. I'll go back a bit. I'll explain how to attach a texture. So usually when you don't have anything, you'll see something like this. You'll probably have it as, I think, not emission, but you'll probably have it like, I think principal BSDF. Well, we can work with it, it's fine. Now let's go into, base color here, and we'll be able to choose something called image texture. Image texture basically allows us to import an image, a PNG file, and basically use it as a texture. So when you click on image, you'll see this option appear. Here, we're gonna go into open, and we're gonna go into our color palette, choose it. That allows us to choose it. Now, you don't really have to touch these because just think of this as within the context of low poly. We're not going to mess around with this. We're just going to associate faces. So now let's go into, so let's say we were at modeling. We're going to go into UV editing. When you first load UV editing, you probably won't be looking at this. You probably might not be able to see this image. So if you want to see it, next to UV here on the menu, you'll have the choice to browse the image to be linked. So as you can see, we've linked this page. So we're going to click on it. It'll show up when you open it here. Don't worry about it. Usually it should show up. Now we have this color palette that we're working with. Now, actually, we're going to unwrap. So let's say I had these faces here like this, right? So as you can see, it's looking kind of funky. Now, the reason why I like to modularize all these different parts is because I can just press A, look at it, and I won't be needing to, touch all these meshes at the same time. I can just choose different parts and look at it. It just saves time because, I might be like specifying, oh, I want these to be red, or I want this to be blue. Now, okay, we'll try to, okay, so now let's say I want this to be red. So when you press on these faces, make sure you're on edit mode, face. Probably what will happen is usually you'll see the image like this. Like it'll show up like this within your menu. We're going to press these vertexes here. That, the faces that appear here. Scale it down by pressing S to a little dot. And we're going to drag it towards red. And as you can see, everything goes into red. Now let's say I want the rest of it to be white. Or actually, let's say I want this to be horns. I want these horns to be white. How am I going to do this? Well, I have these faces here. Drag it all out. Oh, also, your palette might not be able to sense these kinds of little vertices. What you can do is press A. Press A, and it'll select all of it from the texture. If you press it from here, it'll select everything within the mesh. From here, it'll select everything that you've selected here. So if I scale it down, move it towards white, the horns are now white. Now let's say I wanted the rest to be brown for simplest sake. Well, I know that these colors are already attached, so I'm going to take the rest of the color, scale it down, bring it into brown, and voila, there we go. We have the mesh with its specific color. Now, this is a low poly approach. It's really simple to do. It can look very appealing, something like this. I mean, I think it's pretty good. You can do all kinds of these stuff by just dragging faces. It's really simple. You don't have to draw on it. You don't have to go to the complexity, as we'll look at here. Let's say if we have this Katarina model, we have all these faces, right? So the way that they've done it is they've attached a UV map layout like this, and then try to map everything to numbers and letters. And then once they mapped it, they know, oh, from 3 to 9 to 9, we have the face. So we're going to try to basically modify the mesh in a way that our faces can see. So let's say I wanted my face to be like this. And then we'll probably attach, a texture here. But this is quite a lot of work, especially if you're working on little projects. So I really do recommend you to just take this approach of low poly in this way. It's really simple to do. I think beginners should start this way. Well, it doesn't teach you good practice, but for low poly aesthetics, it's fine. So let's go. So this is another kind of modeling that you can do. So this is 3D pixelation. You can achieve all these kinds of look with just a UV map. So as you can see, this is what's called flat texture. I think Unity also has the feature to turn that on as a shader, but you can also turn that on as a default by going to lighting, press flat. And it'll flatten out, no shadows. And it'll try to remove all, the disgusting edges that might pop out. These are the kinds of approaches that a lot of indie game developers have been taking around recently. It looks great. It looks really cute as well. So this is something I suggest you try. Now let's go into animation.
Sorry to interrupt, but there's a couple questions in that.
Mm-hmm. How do you see the texture in the model viewer? By model viewer, do you mean from modeling here? Is that for, oh, wait, there's a lot of, how do you fix it by hand? I'll start with how do you fix it by hand? Oh, okay. Is that vertex painted? Nothing's painted. I'm just associating faces to the texture. How do you see the viewer in the model viewer? Here, you can't technically see it unless you go into this corner here, drag it out. This is a feature that you can do in Blender, and you can create multiple windows. So usually when you go towards a corner, you'll see these little, like FPS looking, I'm not sure what they're called, reticles. You'll be able to drag it out. I think 3 is the max. If it's not, correct me. What you can do is you can go into this thing here. Remember at the beginning of the slides, this thing here allows us to look at the different kinds of windows of editors. So what we can do is we can go into UV editor here. So as I've mentioned before, you might not be able to see the texture the first time. Assume that we put in a texture here. We're going to press this little box here, and it allows us to choose the material that we've already attached to the model. Press it. You can see it from here. Edit, see everything attached. If we can see from here, we're going to go into lighting, texture. Boom. We can see everything. Is that fine as an explanation, or is it still confusing? Okay, good. Now, keep in mind, I think I've put my contact info in the slides as well. I'm really available on the Discord server of GameDev. If you have any questions, always feel free to ask. It'll be my pleasure to help. And so if you have any questions, feel free to email me or just ask me on the Discord server at any time. So now let's move on to the last part, which is the animation. Animations allows us to create, these kinds of little actions that we might want to do with our characters. Now, to do this, we're going to have to attach what's called bones. So imagine this is the skin. So we have let's say my arms flailing, right? The reason why I can flail it is because I have bones inside of my skin, or else I'll be hollow. So the way that I can do this is I can go into object mode, Shift A, and we can see here towards the end something called armature. And we can use a single bone. Now, a way that what you can do to get, so I think mine shows default human meta rig. To have that shown, what you can do is go into Blender Preferences from Edit. Once more, I'll say it again. You go into Blender Edit Preferences, or you click on Blender from the top left. If you're on Mac, press on Preference. You'll be able to see what's called add-ons. And from add-ons, what we'll do is we're going to search rig, enable rigify. Actually, no, not rig. I think it's armatures. Default. Enable the add-ons only. I should be able to see it. Armature properties, bone properties, legacy mode. It should be rigify, I believe, unless I'm wrong. Make sure to rigify will give you a default rig. Oops. Actually, I just wanted to double check. Okay. Well, can we edit the texture while it's in the Blender UV editor? Oh yeah, of course. If let's say I didn't want to use this kind of texture, I wanted to edit it within Blender, what I can do is I can use a third-party application, update the image, save it, come back. Usually there are add-ons for that. Unfortunately, I don't have it on this machine here. But usually you can have add-ons that allows you to basically update the image at every single time. Or what you can do is you can go into texture paint. And you should be able to color it. Well, color your basically color your palette, but you probably don't want to do this. So yeah, I think my answer would be, so there should be a third-party application for that. Look, if you Google it, to show right away. It's a way to edit the texture from a third-party software such as Photoshop or like ACPrite. Now, quickly, I want to really do cover rigging because it's quite important. So when I click on Shift from the object mode, but before that, what I can do is I can press on head and body base by holding a control, and then Control J from object mode, which allows me to combine the whole mesh. See? Yep. Okay, now let's go into object mode real quick. Go into armature, human rig, which allows me to import a rig. Now we're going to attach this, but beforehand, make sure your model here is from the origin bottom. Like your feed is basically at 0, 0. And what you're going to do, expand the rig and try to attach it. Go into X-ray mode. I'm going to do this real quick because I do want to show you how to do animations. Now we're going to go into edit mode from the metal rig. Select these things. Try to, just try to copy how it looks like. Rotate here, move it, good. Rotate again, translate it back. We're going to take this face here, bring it back in. So let's say I have this rig Okay, it's kind of looking weird. Okay, so let's say I have this rig here. And I want to now attach it to this mesh. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to press from object mode, Shift plus A. Oh, no, sorry. Is it Shift plus P? No, Control plus P. Sorry about that. I'll repeat once more. You go into object mode, Control plus P, which allows you to set a parent. And what we're going to do is we're going to set it to automatic weights. I won't be going to weight painting. Just know that usually if you have any problems with weights, if you have any problems with rigs, it's probably because you haven't attach enough mass in a specific bone. But like I usually when you use a default human rig, it should be enough. So let's say we have everything. So we have this rig attached. We go into animation, and from pose mode we can select specific bones, move it, and if you look at it here, our rig is moving at the same time. And now let's try to create a little simple animation. So we have this thing called dope sheet. And this allows us to insert keyframes. Keyframes are basically like, it's like basically animation. So the way that we're going to insert keyframes is we're going to press all from the pose mode, press on I. We're going to choose whichever we want. Usually I want to go for the location, rotation, and scale because it's more accurate. So now it should show up in here. Oh boy, okay. Insert keyframe. Yes, please. Okay, why aren't you working? Okay, I'm running a bit out of time. I'm sorry about that, but I'll quickly show what should happen when you insert all of the keyframes. Usually when we insert all the keyframes, we should have something like this. Usually what you want to do is try to get 0 and 16 to be similar, because if you want to do loop animations, but I'm not, we can choose here from start to end. So start is like where we begin, end is where we end. And we're going to press, so let's say I have everything attached, all the, we've inserted all the keyframes, and let's say press play. As you can see, my guy's running. And we have loop enabled by default because our end is at 16. So it's going to at 16, repeat at 0. This is how you create an animation. So, okay. So use keyframes that you can find online. So what I mean by that is you can, if you don't know how to animate properly, look for running animation keyframes. If you search it out on Google, it'll show you like specific keyframes that you want to use. Feel free to use rigs Blender offers built-in. That means the Rigify that I was talking about, the add-on. Work closely with the dope sheet. Dope sheet is here. This is where we control all of the keyframes. This is important. And for looping animation, try to get the first and last frame to be the same. And now quickly, I'll just say that there's a, next up, we have an ECS talk, which is Entity Component Talk by Roy from our club, who also does really cool game engine stuff. And thank you. This was the end of Introduction to Blender. Once more, if you have any questions, the slides are also available in the public. If you have any questions, contact me. I'll try to help out as much as I can. Thanks.